Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What is the darkest part of humanity that you have ever seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked in community care. A patient, let's call him John, not his real name, I looked after was a schizophrenic who had spent most of his life in institutions but was now living in the community with a dedicated team. His illness was such that he had no way of discerning the thoughts of dreams from reality. It was all the same to him. Like a lot of people with his condition, he grew up being predated upon and all those around him, but mostly his alcoholic father, who would R him on a regular basis. He was in his early 50s when I met him, a seriously damaged man, but also a lovable character when you got to know him. When he went to bed at night, the nightmares would begin, and you'd hear him crying and screaming in his sleep. No, Daddy, no. The abuse was never in the past for him. It was always there in his head, as real as everything else. One day I was sitting alone with him in the car, and he started talking to me. He wanted to get something off of his chest. When his dad died, the whole family, who were terrified of him, were sitting in the house with him. His dad started having a heart attack, and pretty soon it became obvious to the rest of the family. No one spoke. They just all sat there as the father struggled and gasped for help, but no one would get up to help him. They all just sat in silence and watched him die. John was crying when he asked me if he'd done something wrong. I reassured him he hadn't. ER doctor here. I once saw a 2-year-old child. He was the cutest boy I've ever seen. Green eyes, long curly blonde hair, and a very cheerful personality. Everybody in the ER loved him. Apparently his parents left him without any food or water. They went for a vacation. A neighbor heard him crying, called the police. They broke in, found the boy, and took him to the ER. He was beaten up. There was blood dripping from his left ear. There were multiple other old wounds all around his body. And still, he just wants to play with me. He just wants some love. He tried to hold my hand. I broke down, called my senior to continue examining him. I've seen teenage suicides, homicides, all kinds of shit. But this broke something inside of me. I was in hospital. I was a sick kid with a 3 or 4-year-old. His mom had given him caustic soda in his bottle. It melted half his tongue away. He lived in a hospice with some nuns, and he'd come in weekly to have his tongue stretched in the hopes he'd be able to talk one day. He was cute as a button. I wonder how he's doing. He'd be in his 20s now. Not nearly as bad as anything else I've read here, but the ATM-like machine in a Vegas casino that let you take out a second mortgage on your home was easily one of the most evil things I've seen. Any genocide memorial in Rwanda, they have a couple where they kept the corpses as they were found. Horrific. I was shown a large brown stain on a wall and informed that this wall was where they swung infants to kill them by bashing their brains. I still cannot fathom that. 100,000 people were butchered in the space of a month and a half by hand machete. The day after Christmas sale at major department stores, the gift wrap was half price. A woman keeled over onto the floor with what appeared to be a heart attack. People continued shopping over the top of her legs. Store employees had to form a circle around her to try to get her blocked off from the crowd. Ambulance crew had to nearly fight their way through the crowd to get to her. No one would move. The attempt at rescue took far longer than it should have. Even when she was on the gurney being taken out, people were still shoving the crew. There was this one woman with her daughter who lived around my neighborhood. She used to pimp herself out in order to feed her daughter and herself. Well, when she got old and wasn't attractive enough for the business to make a lot of money, she decided to start pimping out her 13 to 14-year-old daughter to old dudes for money. I know it's tame compared to other stories, no it isn't, but it's effed up. And what's even more effed up is how often things like that happen. And often than that, all the cartel videos are some of the other side of the darkest stuff humanity has to offer. You know, there's an American retail chain called Walmart that I don't go into because in my area years ago at the start of a Black Friday sale, a person was trampled to death in the lobby. And instead of closing for the day out of respect, they closed for a whole 3 hours and then opened up. And thousands of people walked right over the chalk outline of that dead body. Even though there wasn't a chalk outline, but you get it. I was visiting family in Cambodia. We had a ceremony in my wife's village, and during, I was told an old friend couldn't make it because he doesn't feel well. We decided to pack up some food to bring to him. I had gotten used to the style houses here, so it was a surprise to find a single house Western style. White picket fence, kids' toys on the lawn, garden, sticks out like a sore thumb. We were actually going across the street to the ditch. Bamboo and mosquito net was haphazardly thrown around, dirty dishes everywhere, a chicken in a much too small cage, garbage in the middle of a skeleton state. He almost looked like, I couldn't believe a human still moves and talks in that state. He almost looked like a movie puppet. He spoke about his pending death and what his body will allow that day. Out popped an elderly woman that chimes in she will not be far behind him. She shows off what looks like a pregnant belly. It's from hepatitis. I was obviously taken aback by people willingly passing away in a ditch. I asked if they have family. My wife said yes and pointed to the Western-style house. The owner was watering his lawn at that point. He smiled and waved at us. We waved back. It took the old man 3 weeks from that point to die in the ditch, across from his son watching TV on his couch. Not me, but my cousin, a U.S. Marine, was in Kosovo during the ethnic cleansing. He's never been the same. Since leaving the Marines, has not been able to hold a job. Before he left, he was light-hearted and hilarious. Now he's kind of like a shell of his former self. Probably a lot less effed up than some of the other stories here. My mother was abused by my grandfather for years when she was a little girl. He never went to prison for it because she really didn't have any other family left, and my grandfather's family, it's a very long story, basically gaslit my mom into not testifying or pressing charges. Decades later, my mom has basically moved in and is trying not to dwell on it. He visits our house for Christmas. We pick him up together, and it's okay, no big deal. If you forget what he did, he's just this nice, albeit annoyingly incapable old man. No problems over Christmas break, although he's a handful because he's 82. My mom decided to drive him back alone. On the way back, they discussed that topic. He basically dismissed it and said, "I don't know why you're complaining, you enjoyed it." She was 7 at the time. I'm thankful I wasn't in the car, because I'd be in jail for murder right now. I would have strangled the life out of that old man. That's such an effed up thing to say. That's so evil. Saw a security camera footage of a gas station robbery. The masked thief held the cashier at gunpoint. The clerk was very calm and handed over the money from the register and followed all instructions the robber gave him. Then the robber hopped over the counter and told the cashier to get on the ground. The man complied and was on his knees getting ready to lay down, and then this piece of shit just executed him on the spot. No sudden movement, full compliance, calm behavior, none of it mattered. No clue if the thief was ever caught. 1983. Watched a mob drag a man out of his car, beat him up, and set him on fire. I was 9. 1988. Watched bodies float down the river and people who had been tied to telephone poles and set on fire with tires. 15. Helped drag bodies out of 2 bomb sites. 17 and 26. Humanity sucks. ETA, Sri Lanka. I maintain we have a national level PTSD. When I was 10 years old, my babysitter, female 16-year-old, died in a traffic accident. She was also my neighbor's daughter. My neighbor, the girl's mom, was of course heartbroken. Since the girl who died was a popular girl, the address was in the newspaper so people knew where to send their respect letters. All the night of the condolences ceremony, burglars broke into my neighbor's home and stole whatever they could find, including stuff from her daughter. They had just died. After finding out what had happened, I developed a very dark and disgusted view on humanity from a young age. I used to work the nightlife scene. I was a fair number of lights and other messed up shit. But the worst for me wasn't even graphic exactly. It was just traumatizing. I had a 15-minute conversation at 6 a.m. with a date R victim who was trying to get her phone and purse back from the bar. She remembered being out that night before. All she could remember was getting a drink and blacking out. She woke up in some guy's bed and ended up going to the ER and having an R kit done. Then had to go to the bar to try and find her stuff. On the way home from work last year, I found a burning body on the freeway off-ramp. Someone killed that person, set them on fire, and dumped them. It was early in the morning and boggy. No one else stopped but me. The polite and the police said no one else even called it in. In college, we have required units dedicated to community work. Opted in for the one where you teach stuff to underprivileged or understaffed public schools. I was going to teach basic bioscience and shit, majored in biology. Turned out I was going to teach basic English, and it turned out my students would be adult women, age ranges from early 20s to 50s. Apparently, they were all part of this program to rehabilitate and try to reintroduce abused women to society. Most of them had severe PTSD. No cognitive disabilities or anything, but some of them can barely speak my native tongue because of the PTSD. Some of them were so unresponsive. I didn't get all the details of what they went through, but I think shit was so bad they became essentially mute. My stepdad was a bad person, but he was bad at it. He even tried to create his own gang, but everyone that he tried to recruit were a lot more dangerous than he was. Some of them agreed to be a part of it, but you could always tell if they had the same air as a big brother, patting his younger sibling on the head and telling them they're doing a good job. As a kid, watching all this unfold, there were times I'd be embarrassed of him. Not just because he was attempting to do horrible things, but that he did them in such a childish way. But there was a chain of events that seemed to flip all of it around. My grandfather ran a tattoo shop out of his home and usually accepted different drugs as payment, so there were a lot of shady people hanging around. My stepdad always put on this machismo show when we'd go over there and pretended he ran the place. He was always loud, saying stupid things and running around acting tough. But there was this one guy who came for a tattoo. He had bodyguards, and the whole vibe of everyone changed immediately. Even my stepdad sat down and was silent the entire time. I was put in another room, but could still feel how tense everyone was. It was strange. He wasn't even a scary-looking guy. Tall, pretty skinny, dressed normal, but wore these cowboy boots with giant spurs. He even had the hat to match it. He hung around for a couple of hours, got a tattoo, and left. But on the way out, he noticed that someone had stolen some rims out of the back of his truck and demanded that they figure out who it was. My grandfather had cameras everywhere, so we were easily able to find out who it was. Just some dude who came over semi-often and was always stealing whatever he could round up. When he showed up in the next one, it was about 10 p.m. on a school night, but I was brought along anyhow. My stepdad and a couple of other guys beat him for well over 3 hours. The things I saw, heard, and smelled have stayed with me. They broke his legs, let a dog maul him, beat him with bats, split his skull, broke as many ribs as they could. Both were... There was blood, vomit, and his feces everywhere in that room. He lived somehow, but was in the hospital for the better part of a year. The weird thing is that about 2 years later, my stepdad AR'd me, but I never have nightmares about it. All my nightmares are about that night. Their daughter was sadistic and slickly really well in the mind. But the sounds he made, gurgling and all, are what really bothered me. He sounded like a dying animal, which I guess he was, but when the Hope Bridge slipped away from him, it was crushing. I know this pales in comparison to all the effed up stuff in the thread, but I once heard some weird noises from a dumpster. I opened it and found inside a plastic bag 6 dog puppies. All could be, and all cold as F and pretty much passed out, except the smallest one who kept wailing and wailing. Took them out and to a vet. He basically told me, "Nah, mate, they're done for." Took them home, put them in a basket with blankets and stuff. They died one after the other in a couple of days, the smallest being the last one to go. It effing broke my heart, and I don't even like dogs. I can sort of understand, for a very narrow definition of understanding, how hate can bring people to do horrible things to other people. But this? You could have solved it in a Rubik's Cube in a dozen different ways, without spending a dime and wasting maybe 2 hours of your life. But you chose that. What the F are you? I was a paramedic for 34 years. I've dealt with murder, R's, hangings, people burned to cinders, children burned to cinders, self-inflicted slashed throats, cot deaths, drug overdoses by the dozen, etc., etc. So I guess I've seen more of the dark side of humanity than the light side.